Hello, everyone. We are giving another couple of minutes for commissioners to arrive, so it'll be a little bit longer before we start. Good evening, everyone. I'm Deborah Lockwood, Chair of the Washington County Planning Commission. Today is July 24th, 2024, and this evening's meeting of the Planning Commission is called to order. May we have the roll call, please?
Yes, Commissioner Fry.
Present.
Commissioner Fry, I believe you're muted.
Present.
Commissioner Kaiser.
Here.
Commissioner McClendon is absent tonight. Commissioner Monteblanco.
Here, apologies for the tech difficulties earlier.
Commissioner Rosenberry.
Present.
Commissioner Whips will be absent tonight. Commissioner Will.
Present.
Vice Chair Maury Bidu will be absent this evening. Chair Lockwood.
Present.
Looks like we have 6 members present, and we do have a quorum.
Thank you. Next item is Director's Report.
Thank you, Chair Lockwood. My name is Erin Wardell, and I'm the Assistant Director of Land Use and Transportation. I have tonight's Director's Report. First, an announcement about an upcoming project. The county's Transit Development Plan online open house will be live August 2nd through September 6th. This project will help identify improvements to public transportation in rural Washington County and other areas not well served by transit. You can visit the LUT webpage for more information, and we'll make sure to share that link with the Planning Commission when it's live. I also wanted to update the Planning Commission that last week the Board of Commissioners rejected Ordinance 899 relating to the North Plains urban growth boundary expansion. The Planning Commission and county staff both recommended rejection to the board. North Plains is anticipated to start a new process later this year to modify its previous urban growth boundary expansion proposal. The county will continue to work with the city on that request, and if it does lead to another city ordinance, it will lead to a county ordinance as well. So we'll keep you updated as that process moves forward. For tonight's Planning Commission meeting, your meeting will be primarily dedicated to your first hearing of our two significant natural resources ordinances, numbers 901 and 902. For your upcoming Planning Commission meetings, we have a number of hearings relating to ordinances. So your next meeting on August 7th will be your first hearing on ordinance number 903, which is the parking reforms resulting from the state's climate-friendly and equitable communities rulemaking. Your August 21st evening meeting will most likely be a continuation of your hearing tonight, second hearing on ordinances 901 and 902. Your September 4th day meeting, if needed, could be a third hearing on 901 and 902. It depends on the wishes of the Planning Commission. And then September 18th evening meeting, and you could also on September 4th have your second hearing on the Ordinance 903 parking reforms. And then September 18th could be a third hearing on Ordinance 903 if needed. So we'll see how our next hearings go and have an idea of how we'll be scheduling those out, but you do have a number of hearings ahead of you. For our next series of meetings, we are expecting to be in this room, the auditorium. We'll generally plan to be in here for our hearings, particularly when we expect to have a large amount of public testimony. And that concludes the director's report. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Ordell? Not seeing any hands up, so thank you. Next item is public communication. Has anyone signed up for public communication? Not for an item not on the agenda?
No one has signed up in advance for public communications. Is there anyone in the audience or virtual audience who would like to communicate to the Planning Commission on any non-agenda items? If so, please indicate by raising your hand or virtual hand. Okay, it looks like we have one person who has raised their hand. Looks like that's Jim Long. Jim, please state your full name and location.
My name is Jim Long. I am in Tigard, Oregon. I'm chair of CPO4M, and I just wanted to make sure that you got the bird and critter list that I've been talking about a couple of times previously, that lists over 300 different species of birds and animals. And they couldn't be here tonight. They didn't get the notice, but I'm sure they would like to have people speak up for them. So please take a look at it, and if you have questions, let me know. I'll be back next meeting too. Thanks.
Looks like we have no others with their hand up. We can move on.
Thank you. All right. The next item is our public hearing on ordinances numbers 901 and 902. We can have our staff presentation. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair Lockwood and Commissioners. I'm Michelle Miller, Senior Planner with Washington County Land Use and Transportation. Tonight's public hearing is on ordinance number 901 and 902, amendments to the county's Goal 5 program for significant natural resources. Before I get started on the topic at hand, I did want to take a moment and acknowledge this big milestone and to extend my gratitude and thanks to all what we call the S&R team who's worked on this project all along the way. Thank you, Chair Lockwood and Commissioner Will, for serving on our technical advisory committee and providing your perspective. I want to recognize Kathy Corliss with MIG, our project manager consultant, who's been so dedicated and has worked tirelessly, and I might add patiently, with us as to draft many of the documents that you have before you this evening. Then to our leadership team, Stephen Roberts, Aaron Wardell, and Tricia Cherniak and Rob Lovett. Your guidance and leadership and support has been integral in getting these ordinances before you this evening. Most of all, my colleagues in our community planning section have been a part and a huge support of the Focus Look project, and especially Susan Savin and Teresa Garesco, our core S&R team. Our record-breaking community outreach could not have been accomplished without the help of Tracy Shirley, Emily Brown, and Susan Aguilar. We had many new innovative ways to get information out to the community using our GS team, as well as our communications team, Melissa DeLizer and Brenda Schaefer. I'm so excited to share with you this work and the ordinances that you have before you this evening. Tonight's hearing is the first public hearing on the Significant Natural Resources Comprehensive Plan change. I ask that you hold your questions until the end of the presentation because we have a lot to get through this evening. I'm briefly going to go over some of the high points of the background on this work that have led up to the ordinances. This project needs to follow statewide planning Goal 5 requirements, and I will be talking briefly about that. Following the Goal 5 process resulted in several reports and comprehensive plan amendments that I will go over. It includes the draft habitat inventory report and the Goal 5 report, which is included in your packets. Then I'll talk about what's included in the ordinances. Ordinance number 901 includes amendments to the comprehensive framework plan for the urban area and the community plan text and maps. And ordinance number 2 is about the development code changes to the significant natural resource regulations and other minor changes throughout the code that is affected by the S&R regulations. Some of the background may be familiar to you, but we're including this for the record and the information for the public. Since the 1970s, the foundation of the statewide program for land use planning in Oregon has been the 19 statewide planning goals. We're focusing on statewide planning Goal 5. It requires local governments identify and protect significant natural resource areas. It affects other resources like cultural and historic resources and open space, but our focus is on natural resources. The Oregon Administrative Rules 660 Division 23 outlines the process or the roadmap for how we comply. We adopted a Goal 5 program with an inventory and regulations in the early 1980s following older OARs known as Division 16. Since that time, the Goal 5 rules have changed quite a bit, along with important changes in state law that impact the county's original Goal 5 program. In 2017, the legislature expanded the requirement for land use regulations to be clear and objective when they applied to all housing development, not just needed housing, and all land, not just buildable land. It impacted the county's regulations as they were found not to be clear and objective, and as a result, were under legal scrutiny. We adopted significant natural resource regulations in 2020 to address the state law clear and objective requirement, but those standards were appealed to the Land Use Board of Appeals. LUBA remanded this ordinance back to the county for further changes. In their decision, they directed the county to follow current Goal 5 rules for any changes to the significant natural resource regulations and that the standards needed to be clear and objective. Based on the LUBA remand and an enforcement order, the county undertook a broader review of its Goal 5 program. Next, I'm going to give a brief overview of the project for updating our Goal 5 program for the urban unincorporated areas of Washington County, which we called the Limited Goal 5 Program Update, a focused look at fish and wildlife. We applied the Goal 5 process set out in the OAR's Division This graphic shows the 3 main steps and our general timeline for accomplishing those steps, beginning with the inventory steps, where the natural resources are identified and determined to be significant. At the board's direction, our process, step 2, is where we analyze the economic, social, environmental, and energy consequences of allowing uses that could conflict with the resources, or the ESEE analysis. The final step was taking that analysis, weighing and balancing those impacts, and developing the policies and regulations that make up the Goal 5 program, which is where we are today. This slide has the project in a nutshell. On the left are the required Goal 5 process steps, and the middle column shows the deliverables in the form of the reports or the changes to the comprehensive plan documents. The column farthest to the right is the outcome, where the applicable documents will live in the elements of our comprehensive plan. For example, the habitat inventory report will be adopted by resolution and order and will become part of the comprehensive plan volume 1A of the resource document. The Goal 5 report, which includes Title 13 compliance, will also be part of the resource document and adopted by resolution and order. And then the third step, developing the policies and regulations, the changes that become part of our comprehensive framework plan, text and maps, and all of the community plan text changes and significant natural resource maps, those comprise Ordinance number 901. And the Community Development Code changes are amendments included in Ordinance number 902. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about our first Goal 5 step, the inventory and draft habitat inventory report. That's attachment B in your materials. Our draft inventory contains 2 habitat types shown in this graphic. We have the riparian wildlife habitat, which contains the water resources and the adjacent stream bank areas, and then the upland wildlife habitat, further upland from the riparian with the treed areas that you see in the graphic. These are the natural resource categories that comprise the updated inventory shown on the maps in the draft inventory report. Those start on page 39 in your materials. The board directed an update to the county's 40-year-old wildlife habitat inventory for the urban unincorporated area, recognizing that we needed to comply with the Goal 5 process and Metro Title 13. The report includes a methodology used for consolidating the inventories and identifying the location of the significant natural resources. It contained tables with the updated area totals. It also incorporates the inventories from cities where it's available, who adopted more recent inventories, as well as includes the inventories prepared by the county for North Bethany and Bonnie Slope West, as these were areas that were added to the urban growth boundary after the county did its first initial Goal 5 inventory. The next series of slides show how the maps were consolidated and the end result using the example of the Bethany area. This first map is the county's significant natural resource map that was done in the 1980s, showing the original county habitat. The legend shows the county categories in blue for the water-related habitat and the green for the wildlife habitat. Here's that same area with the metro layers overlain with the county's layers, and the county's layers are kind of in the background with the brighter colors as the metro habitat that was overlaid on top. And here's the resulting significant natural resource map after we replaced the county's water areas with Metro's riparian wildlife habitat and removed some upland areas that were developed or met other requirements for removal in our methodology. This gives an example of areas where the Metro upland went beyond the original county wildlife habitat. They are the yellow and orange areas. You can see they are areas that are primarily adjacent to the riparian wildlife habitat, those blue areas, and in all cases, they are forested areas that our consultant deemed to be significant habitat. So next I'm going to move on to the Goal 5 report. That's the ESEE analysis and Title 13 compliance. It's attachment C in your materials. This is the second step in that Goal 5 process I showed earlier. The relationship between Goal 5 and Metro Urban Growth Management Functional Plan is a bit complex in that there are special requirements depending upon whether the resources are considered regional resources by Metro, where Title 13 controls, compared to the other resources where local jurisdictions need to follow a standard state Goal 5 process, which means we must complete the economic, social, environmental, and energy analysis for those resources, aka that's the ESEE. This graphic shows how that relationship was discussed in the Goal 5 report. It is part Title 13 compliance reporting for the regionally significant resources, namely the riparian wildlife habitat for the urban area, and part ESEE analysis for those resources that are not Title 13, namely upland wildlife habitat. There's a bit of a distinction, which I'm going to be talking more about in the next slide. Metro has regional resources in the urban unincorporated area that the county must protect to be compliant with Title 13. When Title 13 was adopted in 2005, they made a distinction for those resources that were added to the urban growth boundary after 2005. Then additional requirements were put in place for Metro's upland wildlife habitat that local jurisdictions need to adhere to. So the map on the right shows all of the areas that were inside the urban growth boundary in 2005 in blue, and the orange areas are the areas that were added after 2005 or after the time of Title 13 adoption. So also of note in this map are those urban growth boundary areas that are on the fringe. Those are most likely going to be going into a city one day, and development is limited by our land use district that we apply there. And so when development occurs, along with that annexation, the rules of the city's significant natural resource requirements will apply and not the county's. Some of the significant habitat in the inventory was not required by Title 13 to be protected. For those locally identified resources, the county needs to follow the standard Goal 5 process, including preparing an analysis of the economic, social, environmental, and energy, or ESE consequences of allowing, limiting, or prohibiting conflicting uses within the resource and its impact area. In the case of upland wildlife, that is a pre-2006 area, those blue areas, it includes a small percentage of the riparian wildlife habitat that's expected to be outside of the verified riparian wildlife habitat boundary, but it's inside the significant habitat boundary as a whole, and therefore it's regulated as upland wildlife habitat. And it's being evaluated through the ESEE process, which includes that analysis. To make the distinction from these resources subject to Title 13, we sometimes refer to them as the locally significant resources. So here's a summary of the ESEE analysis with the outcome of whether to allow or limit the conflicting uses for upland wildlife habitat, along with the column on the right that describes what that means in the program decision or how that's carried forward into the ordinances that are before you this evening. In this table, these conflicting land uses on balance led to the decision to allow the conflicting use. Starting with the high-intensity urban, the ESEE determined that it would allow the conflicting use because it provides the greatest opportunity for compact and efficient development, and that ranked high compared to limiting development in these areas. And therefore, it would be exempt from the upland wildlife habitat standards, and it's not included in the community plan maps where that land use district is applied. Transportation and utilities. The ESEE determined that those uses would be allowed because it allows for the most efficient design. It may be necessary to impact resources, and therefore they're exempt from the tree removal and retention standards. For parks and public parks and open space, the allow decision, the ESEE outcome was an allow decision, and it includes important positive ESEE impacts and the negative environmental impacts of recreational uses that might occur in a park as outweighed, and it's relatively limited. Park construction and maintenance are therefore exempt from tree retention and removal requirements for upland wildlife habitat. This slide shows where the ESEE gave a lightly limit decision. That includes other urban, residential, and institutional districts because the need for housing and less intense urban uses is balanced with the opportunities to mitigate and minimize the impact to the resources through careful site design and replanting trees. So therefore, the standards for tree removal and retention apply. For future urban and non-urban, those pre-2006 urban growth boundary expansion areas, the decision is also to lightly limit. There are fewer properties and residents, and most non-urban activities can continue with regulations that minimize impacts on these very large sites where development is limited, and we have the standards for tree removal and retention apply. So moving on to the program recommendations from the ESEE analysis, where those conflicting uses are lightly limited in the upland wildlife habitat, the policies are that mature trees in larger habitat patches that are close to water, like riparian areas, provide the greatest degree of ecosystem services, and that should be a priority. Where impacts can't be avoided, site disturbance areas in such a way that trees with the highest ecosystem services are protected. There needs to be a clear and objective path for mitigation and flexibility in other opportunities to allow for variations in site conditions. And it is supportive as an incentive for clustering residential development away from the resources so the economic and social benefits of providing that needed housing are accomplished in conjunction with the environmental benefits of protecting the resources. Now we're going to talk about the specifics of the ordinance number 901, and that's the amendments to the comprehensive framework plan for the urban area and all of the community plans and maps. Some of you have asked how this all fits together and the relationship with statewide planning goal 5. This graphic shows the planning hierarchy with the goal 5 at the top and the rules that delegate authority to Metro to identify and adopt regulations for resources in their area. The county's Goal 5 program are included in the elements of the comprehensive plan. These were all parts that made up the original Goal 5 program, and we are now updating some of that information through this update process. For the urban unincorporated areas, this means the natural resource policies and maps of the comprehensive framework plan, and also the texts and maps of the various community plans are updated. These are the 901 amendments. The resource documents includes that background material that we talked about through the inventory and the ESEE report. Ordinance number 902, which I'll talk about in a little bit, includes the Community Development Code changes, primarily Section 422, the Significant Natural Resources chapter. Additionally, the resource document contains the background data needed to establish the comprehensive plan in the 1980s, and it included the original Goal 5 inventory and ESEE analysis that was done at that time. So that's why that document is being updated with our new information. Ordinance number 901 includes the changes to the comprehensive plan documents that I talked about, and I'll be giving you a little bit of details about what's included with those. The comprehensive framework plan for the urban area includes policies and implementation measures for compliance with the statewide planning goals, including Goal 5. Policy 10, we're now calling Significant Natural Resources, includes the implementation strategies identified in the ESEE analysis that we talked about, and through this update. Map B of Policy 41 is also updated to show the Goal 5 significant natural resources for the new development areas, those areas that are close to the urban growth boundary. The county has 11 community plans and maps that cover much of the urban unincorporated area. The original Goal 5 program included design elements with prescriptive requirements when developing in these areas. However, we're putting the significant natural resource requirements in our community development code, and that will apply to all of the significant natural resources in the same manner, and it will be clear and objective. Therefore, it was necessary to delete some design elements that were no longer applicable due to annexations to cities, or they have been already fulfilled over time. We removed all subjective specific design elements because they're unenforceable, and we made it clear that the remaining design elements to Goal 5 resources are intended to be some policy guidance rather than development requirements. And then we put a summary, we included a summary of what we were doing in the community plans as part of the 2024 update. So here's an example of the updated community plan maps for Bethany, and that was put in the Bethany community plan map. That's the significant natural resources map. Now I'm going to turn to Ordinance number 902, the amendments to the Community Development Code. Draft significant natural resources Community Development Code standards must be clear and objective and meet Goal 5 and Metro Title 13 requirements. Significant natural resource standards for the rural area are not changing. Our focus has been on the urban area. The purpose of the significant natural resource standards include protecting significant habitat for its ecological function, maintain and enhance water quality by limiting impervious surfaces near streams and water areas, and retain the habitat as a community amenity and balance conservation and natural resources with the economic use of the land. As we started to consider regulations for the natural resource areas, we turned to the idea of adding requirements that focused on retaining and replacing trees when development occurs. As many of you who live on or near these natural resource areas, trees provide important habitat for wildlife and other benefits to us as well. They clean our air and water and support our well-being. Trees are foundational. When trees are planted, wildlife and other plants flourish and are used by many different species. Turning to the draft significant natural resource standards themselves, first, very broadly, the county's regulations will apply to riparian and upland wildlife habitat that are within a significant habitat boundary. I'll be covering the details in the next few slides. For the riparian habitat, the draft regulations are similar to what our current regulations are. Development is strictly to moderately limited near streams and stream banks and water-related resources. Some activities are allowed within these areas. If a development impacts riparian habitat, clean water services requirements may apply. For the upland wildlife habitat, our draft regulations provide a similar level of protection as our current requirements do, but we've added clear and objective standards. Development is lightly limited with a focus on tree retention and replacement. Upland wildlife habitat in post-urban growth boundary expansion areas receive a higher level of protection compared to the pre-2006 UGB areas, and that's per Title 13. In contrast, there are exemptions to when the regulations do not apply. These do apply to these activities in the significant habitat area, like maintenance and repair of structures within an existing building footprint and removal of certain trees within the habitat boundary, like if you have hazard trees or trees that are removed as part of a Clean Water Services approved project. Some trees are exempt in the mapped upland wildlife habitat. We talked about this in the ESEE slide. The exempt activities are like for construction activities in a public park, uses and activities on lots with minimal habitat, or development in high-intensity urban district sites. And similar to the current rules, riparian habitat would be subject to a higher level of protection. Development is strictly limited, but some development activities are allowed. No new or expanded alteration of the vegetation in riparian areas is allowed except for certain activities like stream bank restoration work or alterations permitted by Clean Water Services or for infrastructure. Our intention with the upland wildlife habitat regulation is to balance the protections of habitat and trees with housing and other developments needed by our community. Our draft regulations need to show a path for development that's clear and objective, focusing on the trees that are an indicator of habitat. Keeping that in mind, the draft regulations provide a clear and objective path and 2 alternative discretionary paths, or ones of the applicant's choosing, to attain the level of tree habitat protection for upland wildlife habitat identified in the ESEE analysis. The tree inventory and retention path, the tree canopy and assessment and protection path, there's the detailed environmental report, and those make up those options for that applicants can choose to follow. It provides a greater degree of protection for upland wildlife habitat on post-2005 UGB expansion areas to comply with Title 13. And it also includes an inventory, retention, and planting requirements and addressing those standards. So the first option, the clear and objective path, is the tree inventory and retention requirements. The first step is to conduct a tree inventory of the regulated trees on site. The regulated trees are those native trees 6 inches or greater and in the significant habitat boundary that's outside the riparian habitat boundary. And the table on the right shows how the categories and points are calculated for each regulated tree. Remember, it's about tree points, not area. Larger trees of particular importance or closer to riparian areas receive more points, and that encourages tree preservation. This slide shows some figures based on when the area came into the regional urban growth boundary. As a reminder, this is because there are different metro requirements for these areas. The areas inside before 2005 are blue, right? And the areas that came in after are orange. Applicants must preserve or replace the tree points within the significant habitat area. For the blue areas, it's 50% of the tree points, and for the orange areas, it's 80% of the tree points. But if you're removing less than 10 trees, 10 or fewer trees, and are impacted, and all of the tree points will be replaced, you need to only inventory the impacted trees. So if an applicant needs to make up lost tree points, they can preserve existing native trees that are less than 6 inches in diameter or plant new native trees. The replacement trees can be either inside or outside the significant habitat boundary, but they can't be in the verified riparian habitat boundary. And trees that are planted inside the significant habitat boundary are worth more points. Our next option is a discretionary path. It's called the tree canopy assessment and protection requirements. This is an option for applicants that's not entirely clear and objective. It requires some limited discretion on the part of the decision maker. It's allowed under state law if we have a clear and objective path. It must meet or exceed the intended level of resource protection provided by the lightly limit decision in the ESEE and the clear and objective standards. So this option shows 25 to 30% of the significant habitat on the site must be put in what we're calling the tree canopy preservation area, shown in green on this site, on this figure. And if that's for the pre-2005 UGB expansion areas. And 55 to 60% of the significant habitat for the post-2005 UGB expansion areas. And within this area, there needs to be tree canopy that covers 75% of the significant habitat canopy area. So the third option is the detailed environmental report and requirements for significant habitat. It allows a discretionary approach proposing that type of development, which entails a detailed environmental report and a more intensive Type 3 review. It's flexible, but it's rigorous when other options are not available, and it requires a site assessment, an impact evaluation, and a mitigation plan to offset the impacts. And again, it must meet or exceed the intended level of resource protection as the lightly limit decision. So we had heard that there was a concern about taking care of trees on individual properties and the need for an easy process to handle those situations. So we have our draft rules provide for this type of process with an on-site disturbance area allowance of 5,000 square feet around of impervious area, provided the lot does contain at least one or more existing residential dwellings, or any trees that are located within 10 feet of an existing habitable building are able to be removed by right. And if the property owner needs to remove trees outside of that area, then they need to follow the tree retention and replacement requirements for the upland wildlife habitat. Finally, other proposed amendments include a process to allow adjustments to certain development standards, including lot areas, setbacks, or landscape requirements. And that's to facilitate the preservation of significant habitat, providing incentives and flexibility for development sites to preserve more habitat. A map modification process when there are issues with where the significant habitat has been mapped on an individual property that they believe is inaccurate. And then there are conforming amendments related to CD6C sections, including refining our definitions and clarifying some of the exclusions for tree cutting requirements. At this time, the staff is recommending that that we take your questions and get your feedback and questions at this time, and then conduct a public hearing. We ask that you continue the hearing to August 21st so that we can have further discussions and deliberations. And we are proposing that our consultant team will review the requests for map changes.
Thank you very much for that, Ms. Miller. Commissioners, questions? Commissioner Will.
I just had a quick question about that last statement. You were requesting or suggesting that we, at the end of tonight's meeting, we continue for the purpose of further discussion?
Yes.
An open hearing?
Yes, so tonight we might hear from the community, and there might be some information that you take in that you want to deliberate about and or may have questions about that we would like to get back to you at the next hearing for. So to make sure that we have a thorough discussion of any issues that arise.
And to clarify, so based on expectations of public comment, you're recommending that we also extend that hearing for further public comment at the next one, or would the record be closed?
No, we would be open for further testimony.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay, thanks.
And our assumption was that the Planning Commission, since the package was so large that you might have a lot of questions, that we would be able to answer a lot of them probably tonight, but maybe some of them we couldn't, and that you might hear things from the public that you wanted to learn more about. So our thought was you might want to continue because of that. If you were ready and you felt that you wanted to move forward, that would always be possible.
Commissioner Monteblanco.
Thanks. That was a super helpful presentation. Really appreciate it. Could you go to slide 41?
Oh gosh, I gotta put my glasses on here.
It's like two.
One more.
Yeah, 42, just one more. Can you explain number one to someone who doesn't have a planning and land use background?
Sure,
Please.
sure. So in this instance, there might be a property owner with a house and some upland habitat that is on their property. We are recommending that we have a 5,000 square foot perimeter. Really, it's about the size of a regular lot. Suburban lot is about 5,000 square feet, to allow for any tree removal that they request, kind of by right. And as long as there's a residential dwelling as a type 1 process.
So if I'm a homeowner with a lot of land, I'm allowed up to 5,000 feet where I can take out a tree?
Yes, that's
Thank
it.
you. Thank you. I appreciate that very much.
And I might just
Commissioner-
add, the idea there was that we did hear from a lot of property owners concerned that they wouldn't be able to, say, take out a tree that was next to their home that they were afraid might fall on their home. And so we wanted to provide at least a limited area within which they could remove trees while the larger area would still be preserved.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Commissioner Kaiser.
Hey, just, hold on. Oh, yeah, okay, I'm good. Just to follow up on that and not to get too far in the weeds, help me understand something, because I had partially the same question, but I think it's just a little different. So what we're saying here is, all right, we're gonna have a 5,000 square foot zone or box that we're going to allow people to remove from. What I wasn't totally understanding there is it based on an existing home that is situated there, and then you take the 5,000 square foot box, vertically or horizontally from it, or is it literally you can find a 5,000 square foot box somewhere on the property and designate that area as the place where you want to remove trees? I just was a little unclear to me, and I think you mean it's supposed to be including whatever home is there, right?
It needs to include the home.
So it needs to include the home, and then are the boundaries of it, again, when I say vertical, I mean depth or width, or is it just depth from the front? Is it from the front facade of the house? Is it from the drive? Where kind of what's our boundary on that?
It's of the choosing of the property owner what 5,000 square feet they want to use. So it's a box, kind of like a lot would be, right? You'd have your, but you could
So
you could use the front part of your house as the starting point to go all the way back till you get 5,000 square feet.
Okay, or you could use from the street side in front of your house, as long as your house is included in it, and go back that way if you want it, for example, right? Okay, and again, same way if you wanted to go horizontally along a street frontage with your house in it. You just got to include that house, right?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you.
I'll just read from the section. It's section 422-7.1. And it does say that the disturbance area is a contiguous area, so it's not separate areas. It includes existing and proposed structures, impervious areas, landscaping, and then tree removal within that area. And it would include areas 10 feet from the building.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, it doesn't actually have to be a box. So it's a polygon. And the idea would be that so if you had a barn, a shed, a tennis court, other improvements on your property, you would draw the polygon and a house. you would draw the polygon such that it would include those areas, right? And then within that polygon, you could remove the trees. So in order to protect those, not just protect the house from, again, tree damage, but also perhaps other structures or, improvements. So it does not have to be a square, could be a more organic shape, if that's helpful.
I appreciate it, guys. Thanks.
Commissioner Fry.
Kind of following up on the topic at hand here. But that does require a type 1 application and homeowners being able to navigate a little bit the county process, correct?
Yes. With this, with these regulations, there are going to be some different changes, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of help along the way through on our website and things about how that process will be worked. And we're kind of thinking ahead a little bit for how that's going to be how to navigate that.
I would add that we did look at whether we could make that an out-and-out exemption, right? So that would not require a type 1. There were advantages to making it a type 1, and that there would be a record of that decision, so that when the person has established their 5,000 square feet, or they come in to do the tree removal later, it's like it's within their approved 5,000 square feet, everything is good. And so there were a lot of logistical reasons why a very simple permit was a helpful tracking tool. And I think we felt that it was a little bit complicated to try and write it as an exemption and have it, be something that the county could then follow up on, right? Should somebody expand beyond that 5,000 square feet, for example. So there were trade-offs there, but I think that the permit gives the county the ability to track that, and the homeowner as well.
Okay. Commissioner Rosenberry.
Thank you, Chair. I want to make sure that I'm understanding this thoroughly. The draft requires a permit request, so there's a permanent record of which 5,000 square feet have been assigned. So that can't be changed for 2 years, 5 years. Is there a permanency related to this?
Right. It's a one-time 5,000 square feet on that site. So, presumably, if the applicant, somebody potentially would not have to take all their full 5,000, I suppose, on their first request. They could identify a smaller area and come back in for additional, expanding that area later. But the intention is that it's a one-time, as if it were an exemption, but it's got the type 1 approval, again, by way of a means of tracking that decision.
And then does that follow through to a second owner of the property?
Yeah, the approvals follow the land.
Would you go to slide 39, please? That's it.
Okay.
Thank you. I wasn't 100% understanding how this worked. First, you identify a certain area, and then within that area, the tree canopy covers 75%. Okay. I had one other question. Could you talk a little bit about ESEE and where that came from, and does it have a history of working well? And I know it's in Oregon law, but I'd like to know more about it.
You're absolutely correct that is a requirement of Goal 5 and the Oregon Administrative Rule. And so it is a requirement, and it's a process. It doesn't dictate a specific outcome. It asks local governments, when going through that process, to balance those considerations, to look, it's a very multifaceted and complicated question because it asks you to look at the choices to allow, limit, or prohibit a conflicting use within the natural resource in light of the consequences to the economic consequences, the social consequences, the environmental consequences, the energy consequences, right? So we have multiple consequences to consider. We have multiple conflicting uses. We have various possible outcomes. So that multivariate analysis is dictated by the OAR, but it does not say what that outcome will be. It doesn't say there is this specific outcome that you, a local government, must reach. And so it talks about, one can group conflicting uses, which you've noticed we have done that to try and simplify the analysis, grouped like uses, conflicting uses. You can look at groups or types of resources, which we've also done. And so those things are all allowed under the process. Goal 5 does tell us it doesn't have to be long and complicated.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm wondering, when was this process created?
Oh, that's a great question. I think
Probably in '96 when the OARs came to be.
So it's specific to Oregon, is it? Or
Well, I guess, yeah, that's right. When we had the original Goal 5, the Division 16 included an ESEE at that time. So maybe with
40
the
years?
with the framework of the
great question. Yeah.
OAR.
I would say it is distinct, although it is not entirely dissimilar from a NEPA process at the federal level, or if you were in Washington, you might see SEPA, California CEQA. So there are other processes that are out there, not exactly framed like our ESEE, but they do ask local governments to consider those kind of things. So not entirely dissimilar.
okay.
Does it work well? It is a challenging process, but very thorough, and it's meant to be very thorough.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Rosenberry.
Thank you, Chair. Can you give an example? I'm kind of struggling with, we have option 1, that's the expected path. Can you give me an example of when this discretionary path would be utilized and how often we think we're going to deviate from option 1?
Well, that is a really good question. So we obviously, the county needs to provide a clear and objective path. And we feel we've done that. Our hope was that that would work for the majority of situations that, again, it's hard to know, but we were hoping that we wrote something that would work for the majority of situations. So say 50, 60% at least. Option 2 is what I would call a limited discretionary path, in that it could still potentially be something that could be done as part of a type 2 decision. But it does, because it does involve discretion, it involves notice, it has other requirements that go with the discretionary decision. I think that might be usable in some circumstances, especially where an applicant already is intending to set some land aside, for example, as a part of their development, and that it makes sense for them to do that, and it may be they find that less onerous than doing the tree inventory, recognizing that we did hear from the development community that the tree inventory could be an expensive item. And so this gives them an option to not have to do the tree inventory. It delivers a result that's a little bit more similar to what you have today by way of protecting area, in that, like it protects an area versus protecting trees within an area. Option 3 is there where these other 2 options don't work. It doesn't make, this isn't a good case. This type of project is not a good, or this type of regulation is not one that makes sense for a variance. So if somebody can't meet the clear and objective standards, can't, for whatever reason, option 2 does not work on their site, we wanted an option that would provide kind of the alternative to going through some sort of variance, because it's tailored to natural resources. It's looking at specifically natural resource approval criteria. So it is, if you think of option 3, think of that as the safety valve that is there if the other 2 don't work.
Chair Lockwood, if I could interject, we're hearing from members in our Zoom audience that they're having a hard time hearing our speakers. So if you could move the microphone much closer to your face. Thank you.
Commissioner Monteblanco, and I'm sorry I missed your hand earlier.
Oh, you're good. Sam, slide 39, please. Really appreciate all the visuals. That helps my brain. This probably seems silly to some to do this, but I really appreciate it. For these percentages that you're talking about, the 25 to 30, the 55 to 60, is one of those required by Title 13? I think the background of my question is like, how do we come up with these exact percentages?
So the 25 to 30, so it's 30% of the significant habitat in the the older UGB pre-2006 UGB areas, right? So if you think of that as kind of the original area. And if the reduction to 25% is there to encourage applicants to select sites, tree canopy preservation areas that are adjacent, abutting a riparian area. So there's a reduction to encourage or incentivize that selection. So in order to keep that connectivity. So that reduction, so that's also the case with the 55 to 60%. The percentages were based on looking back at what the county had done previously, what was considered in kind of like what's kind of been a typical practice. Also looking at, again, these need to be at least as protective as the clear and objective path. So we were balancing that factor as well. The selection of 55 to 60% in the post-2005 UGB expansion areas was based on looking at the levels of protection that are provided by Title 13. The county needs to be substantially compliant. The measure of substantially compliant is based on looking at things like the Title 13 model ordinance. What level of protection does that provide? And then how does this compare? And so that's what we were looking at when we were trying to identify the percentages.
Okay, I think it's connect me to the dots. I might have some follow-up questions in an email, but I appreciate that very much.
Commissioner Kaiser.
To Commissioner Monteblanco's point, or at least to add to this question, I think the second part of that is the question about how is 25 to 30%, 55 to 60%, 75% determined. It's not so much determined by the county. That's the standard that's set by the county. It's actually going to be determined more than likely by a development applications consulting firm that goes out and looks at what the tree canopy is and determines whether or not that percentage is correct or not, right? Would that typically be what would occur?
Well, I think that in this case, the applicant will be submitting a report saying we've identified this area where it is demonstrating that they've met the criteria to be, let's say they're going to go for the 25%. They're in the pre-2006 UGB area. They say, okay, we're going for the 25%. Here's the distance. There's a requirement of the distance that they must abut a riparian area in order to qualify. So they demonstrate that they've met that. They identify the area showing that it's mathematically 30%, or excuse me, 25% of the total habitat on the site, excluding the riparian habitat. So it's upland, excluding that riparian that's in the Clean Water Services boundary. And then within that, you're correct. I mean, they'll be demonstrating that they have either retained 75% of the canopy that's already present, or they will be showing that they have a planting plan. They'll be submitting a landscape plan that shows the plantings and the time frame in which they will be achieving that 75% canopy coverage.
And I used the wrong term. I said, just because of my job, I said development application. But if somebody was just trying to show this, whether it was a development application or not, in the type 1 application, they would need to have something more than them just saying it satisfies it. I mean, they've got to have some sort of consultant or somebody who says, oh yeah, that works. That's the right amount. It's there, right? I mean, that's kind of how we do that. Am I accurate in saying that?
This would be a part of a type 2 application. So this is not the, yeah, so this would be coming in with a development application in most cases. I think you are correct.
And to Commissioner Monteblanco's question, and I don't directly know what her concern was, but from my perspective, it does add a layer of more expense in the future on each, in particular, or in each development application that might occur. It's probably not avoidable, but nevertheless, it does add another expense that you'll need to get another consultant, or it'll be part of the consulting group you're working with. We'll charge you for that. So it does increase the cost of that no matter what. It just does.
And one point about that, so right now we do have standards on the books. They are not clear and objective, so they're not being applied. But they did say that if you were seriously interfering with the habitat value, then you had to mitigate. So part of what people did was they would do a habitat study and see what, basically, I think, what trees and understory were on a property, and usually propose some amount that would be protected or preserved. So this one is probably closer to what may happen typically now, but our standards are applied unevenly because they're subjective. And so the idea here is to have a stated numerical standard that people know how to meet, and everyone, it's applied to everyone in the same way, so that it's not subjective, it's not inconsistent.
Totally get that. I think my point, or where I was going with this, is when trying to determine that amount, you've got to somehow show precision, right? If you've got a situation where you're using a standard like this, which we're required to do, that's not like I'm disputing that in any way, shape, or form, you have to be able to show somehow that you've met that criteria. Whereas before, the criteria was a little more malleable, and maybe it was a little easier to say, well, that's probably enough, or that's not enough, right? There's both goods and bads about that. My question is, do we have any idea what kind of cost increase there will be? And I don't assume you're going to have this answer, but we don't necessarily have an idea of what that cost increase is going to be because of the delineation you're going to be required to do, right? We don't know how much more work that necessarily is going to be. So it's an interesting question to me. I guess the other question would be, what if you do a development application, just like any other application, and this is appealed, meaning this part of that development application were appealed, or somebody said, no, we don't think they did that analysis right. Would that have to come after a development application has been processed and has been approved? Or can somebody hold up an application based on taking a look at this particular part of the rule? Right. So could you say, oh, wait, before we move on with the development, we want to challenge this analysis that states, hey, you've got to have the canopy in place? Or does it have to come via the process of a public hearing and the usual public process?
So we're sort of conferring here. I think if there is a challenge to what these regulations are, there could be a challenge to this ordinance. If it's a challenge to how it's applied in a particular property, then that would be a challenge to that development application. So it depends.
The decision that it's the type 2 decision of staff would be appealable.
What I'm discussing, and I apologize if this wasn't clear, I was speaking specifically to the metaphorical or theoretical application, not to the actual policy. I get the policy. I'm trying to drill down a little bit to how it would affect an individual application, which I know is hard.
Yeah.
So I'm not expecting you to have all those answers. My question is that in that process, where could this be appealed? Is it only after a decision is made by a planning commission or the county or planning and zoning's hearings officer, or whatever it is?
The staff decision gets appealed to a hearing, right?
So, right, so type 2 decision is at director level, and then that could be appealed to the hearings officer. So the county's process is to the hearings officer, and then above the hearings officer, if, for instance, a type 3 decision is made by the hearings officer, that then is appealable to LUBA.
And to
Thank you very much. Sorry, I know that was a long walk. I appreciate it.
And just to clarify one thing, I think, which is that these are standards just like, for example, landscaping standards, so the standards of 422 are development standards. So I think they are then reviewed as a part of, for the most part, I mean, there are obviously sections that are standalone. We were discussing the type 1 permit earlier, but the options that we've been discussing are development standards that would be applied to a development application.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
And I think to back up with you were talking, and maybe I'm misunderstanding your question, but you were talking about the canopy needed to be evaluated and precise. It's the significant habitat area boundary that's first determined, what that area is. Then it's 30% of that. Then it's 70%. That 30% area needs to be 75% canopy. So that's where the canopy requirement comes in. You don't need to measure the canopy on the other 70% of the significant habitat area. You can develop that area.
Understood. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Rosenberry.
Thank you. Of the portion that would be put into the tree canopy preservation area, does that need to be a contiguous portion? Can they split that up into different sections of the site?
Yes, so the way it is drafted now, if they have a very large area, they can have it in multiple polygons. So again, the applicant can define what and where those are. And Michelle, I don't know, you've got the code open in front of you, and so the section in question is on the next page. Thank you. Let's see, do you want to read it?
Is that? I think it. Hear them.
Yeah.
The total TCPA on a site shall be based on a percentage of the total upland wildlife habitat on the site as specified in the table below, or 500 square feet, whichever is greater. It shall not include any land within a verified riparian boundary. And so if it abuts maximum number, it needs to be at least 10,000 square feet. And if there are more than one TCPA, it needs to be at least 10,000 square feet. And then it needs to be at least 20 feet in width or depth.
Thank you. Which section was
That's
that?
on page 18 and 19.
We're 22-10.3. Page 18 of Exhibit 1 of Ordinance 902.
And if I might add a little background on that, it's a good question. The reason that for large sites, I had recommended initially allowing multiple polygons to be set aside if they were large was that it's possible that in a development site, if they were putting in a new road, it would create two separate areas. And if that was it may be that is the best place to locate the road, and we didn't want to then force the shape of there wasn't room on, say, adjacent to the riparian area. So that was the reason that
But again, it would only come into play on fairly large sites.
The reason I bring it up is recognizing that with vegetation, there are sections that desire more sunlight and some that are more vulnerable to sunlight. And so if we are going to change and create new boundaries, I'm worried about any of the vegetation on the exterior of that portion. And so if it's a long, thin section and we have, as far as I can tell, no requirement to actually achieve the 70%, 75% tree canopy, meaning all of a sudden the new vegetation is exposed, a bunch of it doesn't survive, and as far as I can tell, we're not bonding, we're not requiring any guarantee that 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, they will have gotten to 75% canopy coverage. I raise that as a concern.
I think that's all of the commissioners' questions at this time. So thank you again very much for the presentation and your answers. And I want to thank the audience also for your patience during this part of the evening. Since we've been sitting quite a while, I'm going to propose a 5-minute break, and then we will start our public hearing and hear testimony. So let's have a 5-minute break.
Cookies, right? Yeah, they're right behind that door.
Oh. Thanks, Tom.
Is Commissioner Fry present? Okay.
I'm back.
Welcome back, everyone. At this point, I want to open the public hearing. The first person on our list is Katja Freeborn. I think she's testifying online, is that right? All right, thank you. And would Janine McAnich join her up front? She'll be the next person. And we ask you to state your name and your address, please.
Hi there, my name's Katja Freeborn. I live at 1400 Northwest 94th Avenue, and I live on an acre of forest in Cedar Mill.
Let me interrupt, I'm sorry. I just wanted to let...
Can we stop the clock?
Yes, it's okay. Please go ahead, and you can have that time back. You can see
what was the issue?
It was whether you knew you had 3 minutes. Please go ahead, and we won't take that.
Can we start over?
Yeah.
It's 3 minutes is not enough when you have how many people putting together a proposal. Anyway, I live on an acre at 1400 Northwest 94th Avenue. I have trees that are 100 to 150 feet tall. After the ice storm, I had 6 trees come down. I had to have 6 more trees cut down because they had ground buckling underneath them. 5,000 square feet is not enough when you have trees that are over 100 feet tall. A 50 by 100 lot is too small for the area for people that have an acre or 2. My neighbor has 2 acres. He had trees come down. And so part of the issue that I have is that there are just not enough exemptions for individual homeowners versus developers. I wasn't clear about what developers meant. And I feel like this proposal is being written as the month progresses, because when I looked at the proposal, a lot of the things that were mentioned in the meeting were not even there at that time. The specific documents that we would have to fill out to remove trees are not available to me at this time. I tried to find it online. My property is on an unimproved area of Northwest Kearney behind me, and there are sewer lines, but according to section 422.82, Kearney would not be allowed to be developed anymore, according to the ordinance that I saw. It appears in 422-22 that a list of biologists will be provided that the homeowner would have to contact and pay to have an assessment done for every single tree that would need to be removed on the property. I'm not sure if that's still in there. But I think there need to be more exemptions for individual homeowners. And then somebody said within 10 feet of the house. Good grief, when I have an acre of land, 10 feet is not nearly far enough away from or close to the house to remove trees. If this commission approves these plans, it's like signing a blank check, because I really feel they're being developed as we're here in this meeting even. And I think we glossed over slide 32 and 33. We never looked at the bottom. There was something down there that I couldn't quite see. I wouldn't mind going back to those 2 slides. And then I heard somebody say, well, hopefully this will help 50 to 60% of owners. That's not enough. We have 100% of owners that live on these areas of land, and these new plans have to work for people that live in the county. I don't know. Those are the ideas that I had while I was listening here. But there are a lot of people that have large parcels of property, not just 50 by 100 lots like in downtown Portland, or Northeast Portland. Anyway, that's my personal experience, and it would be very difficult for me to work with my property if this proposal goes forward.
Thank you for your testimony.
Yeah.
Commissioner Will.
Thank you for testifying. I have a question for you. Maybe math isn't the right, you won't come up with a perfect number, but if somebody had like a 2-acre property, would the 5,000 square feet be enough to draw a polygon between their house, their barn, their shed, and their swimming pool, and their play court? Or is there you're suggesting that
Think of a
5,000 is not enough.
Think of a lot.
Is it 5,000 per acre, or is it 10,000 per acre? So that if there
I don't
was
know
to be an
I thought it was
adjustment, what would the
5,000.
ratio be that would be reasonable?
I'm not sure what the dimensions of an acre are, but I know what a 50 by 100 lot in Northeast Portland looks like because I
Yeah.
used to have one.
Yeah.
And it's probably the size of this room. And an acre is probably the size of this building and the parking lot across the street. So that's not enough. It's not enough for individual people. Maybe it is for a developer that's building, 10 houses on half an acre. But, and especially given the emergency situation we had in January.
Yeah.
And we'll continue to have, because this winter it's coming again, and some of the trees are gone, and so now more trees will come down because those trees are gone. And I have a creek. I mean, that means that whole half acre is not usable anymore.
So what you're saying, though, that in general, if somebody has a 2-acre property, and let's say 5,000 was enough for that, if they had a 4-acre property, then there should be something where there's a 10,000 square foot.
That would be an idea.
Some
And not
ratcheting
contiguous.
up. You got a 20-acre property, maybe 30,000 square feet.
I'm asking for more consideration for individual needs, because when you live in Cedar Mill, there's a ravine everywhere you look. There's a different creek that's running down that's feeding Cedar Mill Creek. And some people have a very steep ravine, and some people have a sloped ravine, and it's not like we're right here in the middle of Hillsborough.
And while I have
And
you
it's a
up,
forest.
while I have you up here, if I could ask staff, does anybody know, in the case of emergency tree removal or hazard tree removal, does this ordinance limit that because you have the outright allowed 5,000 square feet and 10 foot around your structure? If you also have areas of hazard trees, are those limited by this?
No, hazardous trees and dead or dying trees are exempt.
Okay, so
So
that's
they would be exempt from the requirements.
okay.
Yeah, but the trees that came down were totally healthy.
Yeah.
I had 13 trees removed. I had a $20,000 tree removal bill.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate your testimony.
Ms. McAnich, please go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Janine McAnich. I'm here with regards to properties on the east side of Washington County, 7277 Southwest Barnes Road. Mapping, we're dealing with outside. We'll be visiting with Michelle, or the consultants will, or whatever the case might be. But what I really wanted to say this evening to this commission and to later to the board and to others is to understand the economic impact to the individual property owner. In this particular case, the individual that owns this 4.9 acres of land has owned the land for 50 years. She's an elderly woman. The county has assessed the property in excess of $4 million for I can't tell you how long. In September, she died. There was an estate appraisal done. At that time, it was $4.5 million. During the course of the month of October, we came to the planning session and looked at the various maps, checked with the planners. They said it would not be impacted in any way, shape, or form. Great, takes care of that. Shortly after that, we received a notice from the county's assessor's office. The county's assessor's office took the property value from $4.5 million to $3 million. They took off $1.5 million without any sort of notice of any kind. We called the assessor's office, and they said, oh, well, that's because of the mitigation land that's going to need to be set aside. All of a sudden, the property value is down $1.5 million. Subsequent to that, this new mapping came out. We had to go through an estate appraisal process, and the appraisers, 2 of them, came back at $963,000 on the impact. Somehow, $3 million plus of value has been lost. In this particular case, this was the individual's only asset. It was encumbered because she's been in dementia care in a nursing facility for 5 years, up until last September. I'm not sure that people in this room, the board, or those at the state truly understand the economic impact on individuals by the various blue or green identifications on the maps. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you. Next are Kirsten Lertz and Stephanie Berg.
Hi, my name's Kirsten Lertz. I live at 7130 Southwest 82nd Avenue in the Garden Home neighborhood of unincorporated Washington County. I have a different issue than most folks I think are going to bring up for you tonight, which is the inaccuracy of the habitat inventory report that was created by LUT and its consultants. As you heard, and you can see it on page 10 of the staff report, they told you that they used two sources to create the new SNR map, and that's the old SNR map that's 40 years old and the Metro map that is 20 years old. And they didn't do any field work whatsoever to verify the accuracy of the contents of those two maps. And I know this because I went to the open houses and asked LUT staff and the consulting staff about this and was told that, yeah, there was a little bit of budget money to do field work, but that they weren't going to do that, and that their call from the commissioners, the scope of the project was to use just the sources of those two maps and not to add anything else in. Well, the issue in my neighborhood is that we've got an undocumented wetland and there's upland habitat that's been designated on the Metro map, but it's level 3, not level 1 or 2. And LUT decided not to use level 3 because they said Metro doesn't require any of us to do that, any of us governmental entities, and we assume that because it was ranked 3 20 years ago, that it's probably not worth anything. It's not high quality habitat. I can tell you that that upland habitat is populated with a stand of Doug firs that DBH is 2 feet across. Those trees, like Katja was talking about, are between 100 and 250 feet tall, and they're between 250 and 300 years old. And my perspective is a little bit different than hers. I would like to keep those in my neighborhood because they house great horned owls. They're pretty cool. And I really think that it was a mistake to limit the inventory mapping to those two sources and then not go out and do any field work. Because at this point, we have a wetland that is about 3/4 of an acre. It's part of the Fano Creek watershed. It's part of the Tualatin River watershed, as by virtue of being part of Fano Creek watershed. And it's not going to be protected at all. No protections. And it would have been easy to come out and take a look. So my recommendation to you is to say, no, we're not going to accept the inventory like this, and we need to know when constituents commented, and that to direct staff to go out and make the inventory accurate.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you for your time.
Hi, my name's Stephanie Berg. My address is 9102 Southwest 149th Avenue in Beaverton. I am the trustee of my late parents' estate. In the very early 1970s, my parents purchased 3 lots, about 5 acres of woodland in Cedar Mill. They built their house on 1 lot, and now the trust owns the remaining 2 lots, totaling about 3 acres of what is now considered a significant natural resource, upland wildlife habitat. For over 50 years, my parents and family have diligently paid our Washington County property taxes for this land, which is zoned R6, even up until like last year. These taxes total quite a large amount, and now we will be unable to use all this land for housing due to our designation as a significant natural resource. It seems unfair to me that my family will be forfeiting a significant portion of our buildable land for saving tree habitat for the county. The issue here seems due to the lack of planning and forethought regarding saving some natural areas during the rapid development of Washington County. All of a sudden, it was too late. So, as the last man standing with forest and land, we property owners of woodland lots should not be solely responsible for providing our land as a significant natural resource at our expense by being unable to develop the land as it is zoned. And I am no urban planner, but when you see the dense development all around Washington County, it seems to me that someone dropped the ball somewhere along the way, and we have to pay for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next are Shannon Scholl, is it? And Jean Shaw. Is Shannon Scholl here? Not going to testify. Denise Yeager. No. Gerhard Mattes. Were you planning to testify tonight? So we'll start with Shannon Scholl.
Jean Shaw.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Yes, Shannon Shaw.
Jean Shaw.
Take a deep breath here. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Jean Shaw.
Hi. We own property on Elvord Road in the Cooper Mountain area, and we have minimal overlay. Our neighbors next door, Ann and Mike Dyke, the former fire chief for Tualatin Valley, they own 3 acres next to us, and they have minimal overlay. We'd both like to sell our property. We're talking to a developer. Our problem is that we have no access to sewer because the property to the south of us has complete overlays on it. And we would obtain sewer, which is existing now on Dowitcher Road. It seems silly to bring us in to the urban growth and then not let us develop because the overlays are so severe on some of these properties. The property to the north of both of our properties is High Hill Lane, and that will be cut off from sewer because of the overlays to the south of us. Sewage runs downhill, and you need it to develop. And this is our retirement. We bought it 20 years ago, and we'd really like to develop it and move on with our life. And the Dykes would too. They inherited a house in Newburgh and would like to move there. And, you know, it's holding a lot of people back from their dreams, not being able to move forward. That's it.
Thank you for your testimony. Okay, but
you might be an example. Maybe other people have different experiences with their property, but there's been a lot of discussion about which maps were used and how the areas proposed here are mapped. Was the property to the south of you mapped previously, and was there anticipation of the ability to bring sewer in the past?
I don't know, but sewer is directly beneath us on Dowitcher right now, and there's a Lennar development. And we own a 2-acre piece that we can develop there, but because of the contour and the slope of the land, we cannot get sewer to our properties. And we were talking to Riverside Homes to develop our properties, and they cannot obtain a sewer easement because they're cut off from developing their property and are just, you know, it's their right to refuse, and that's understandable, but it has the unintended consequence of limiting a lot of development on properties that don't have overlays.
If I could just redirect a staff a question. I remember in the staff report there was some different types of uses that were exempt, like park construction improvements, transportation. Would a property owner who wants to buy an easement from a neighbor through a resource area be allowed to remove the trees for the utility?
So I don't know the particular situation that that the the lady here has mentioned, we do exempt certain utilities from the riparian requirements. And I'm trying to recall if it was also from the tree requirements. So the utilities would be exempted from those. So if they were public utilities, those would be able to move forward. There may be other issues that may be impacting it, but it wouldn't be our regulations.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for answering my question.
All right, please go ahead, sir.
Good evening. My name is Gerhard Matthias. I live at 17040 Southwest High Hill Lane. And actually, my wife and I, we own 3 pieces of property in Washington County. And at our residence, there's a tree probably 15 to 20 feet from the house that is 5 feet in diameter. Now, can you imagine if that tree comes down? And do I need a permit to take it down? If it falls down in a windstorm? My neighbor behind me has trees that are maybe 2 feet in diameter, 150 feet tall, right on our property line. And he's had 2 of them fall across, one on our property, one on the neighbor's property. No wind, nothing, they just decided to fall over. They're about this big around. And he's got a dozen more behind us. If wind comes from the south, it's gonna hit, they fall, they're gonna hit our house. And now this house, my wife has lived there for 47 years, in that house. I've been with her for over 35 years. And then we own a 2-acre piece of property across the street on High Hill Lane, goes up to the top of Cooper Mountain. And the lady that used to live there, Isla Stewart, God bless her, she had the foresight to clear cut it about 15 years ago. Not a tree on the property other than little tiny brush scrubs and other little trees. And anyway, my goats keep those trimmed. What I'm getting at is, this is probably going to cost the homeowner a lot of money if they want to take down a tree. They have to get a permit, they have to get approval, they have to get a county person out there to look at it, or they'll have to hire their own arborist to evaluate that tree and say whether it's healthy or not healthy. And then what? So what I'm getting at is, where are we going with this? I mean, I heard all these ladies, these fine ladies talking tonight. Could hardly hear them because the microphones weren't working or something. And I think they did a good job for what I could hear. And I'm sitting in the front row. And so maybe next hearing you could have things a little better for us, so we can hear what's going on. And then also, I mentioned I was sitting in the front row. I can hardly see your name tags from there, at least the ones in the back. I still can't even see them from here, and I wear glasses. So I see that's Amber, I think. Morgan? I can't read your name because the light's shining right on it, reflecting. Bob, Rob, Aaron, Emily, Susan, and Todd. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your testimony. Tom Austin. And the next name, I'm sorry, I cannot read. Looks like Farzad. Are you here? This person.
I'm looking at the address. I can read that
better. Yeah. Yes, on West 133rd Avenue. Maybe that person is not here. Howard Herman? No, okay. Brian Acuff? And is Rachel Jansen here?
Name is Brian Acuff. I and my brother have house at 4780 Northeast Sewell Road. Right next to us is the land we own, almost 10-acre lot, tax lot number 1N220D000200. All around this land that we have been living on for over 40 years, right now we have high technology development. The land has been cleared all the way around this property. Large, and we have large, expensive technical development taking place. On this land, we have not yet decided whether we will sell this property, and I have yet intended to do so. This type of legislation overlaying on the property will hinder any efforts I have and have been doing on that property for over 40 years, plus have the abstract of threatening other properties and buildings should anything happen with any trees or habitat encroached upon it. Furthermore, it is my intention that I will file suit in a court of law, and I do have the means to do so if this goes through and is applied to this property. I want to make that perfectly clear to all.
Thank you for your testimony. Is Ken Egan here?
I'm Ken Egan. I live at 4080 Southwest Charming Way over in the Raleigh Hills area. I've been a real estate developer for nigh on to 40 years, and about 30 years ago, I was heavily involved in development in Lake Oswego, and they were just putting their tree ordinances in place. Huge killer trees everywhere. And I said at the time, it's not a matter of if, it's only a matter of when, that somebody is going to die in the city of Lake Oswego. And on January 15th, 2 people did. And I want you to think about the unintended consequences of these tree ordinances, because this is really important. You planners and you commissioners need to consider the human side of this thing before you start considering this wildlife habitat. I live in a heavily fenced neighborhood of 1-acre lots that was developed in 1947, and virtually every tree in that neighborhood was planted by people that own those properties. And during the January 15th, I guess it was on the 15th, during the storm that we all know about, our neighborhood was blown out. People have cleared their lots now because they just aren't going to put up with it anymore. Numerous houses in the Raleigh Hills area were crushed, and we're extremely fortunate that nobody got killed. And when I say crushed, I don't mean a tree fell on part of the house. The houses were crushed. They've been demolished. I can take you to them. The human situation here is really important, and I really appreciate that we're going to have another hearing on this so that I can take what I heard this evening and try to put it into some kind of a logical form here. Because just like the gentleman before me, I too have the means to move this thing into court, and I've already spent about $10,000 with lawyers trying to get to where we are tonight, and we haven't gotten very far. Now, I would like at the next hearing to have the staff tell me exactly what a significant wildlife area is, and specifically what it is in my beautifully landscaped, designed by landscape architects, backyard. What qualifies the bureaucracy at the county to manage something that I've been managing just fine by myself for the last 20 years? There's no rhyme or reason to any of this, and you've got to take life safety into account. The only kind of wildlife that's in my neighborhood is dangerous wildlife. It's coyotes that run around and eat people's dogs. My time's up.
Thank you for testifying. I believe we got several people online, so I'm going to call those names. The first is Tanya Steele. Is Tanya Steele available? Okay. Next person is Patricia Jolly.
Hello? Hello?
Yes, we hear you. Please go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting feedback. I don't know why. I live on 18785 Southwest Alderwood Drive. And my concern is a little bit different than the other people's concern.
Can we improve the sound? We're not hearing you very well.
And I kind of understand exactly what the ordinance is about. There's a lot of development on ground.
We can't fix this.
Going down the back. So
Are you gonna?
You know,
I'm sorry. You're very soft for us, and we really can't hear what you're saying.
Oh, can you hear me now?
No.
Can you hear me now? Hello? Hello?
Yes.
Okay, you can hear me now?
Yes. It echoes, but we can hear you.
I don't know why it echoes. I'm sorry. I don't know why it's echoing. I apologize. Anyway, I'm just curious as to, with Willow Creek behind me and the development around, and the neighbors who have lived in basically kind of a horseshoe for many, many years, over 50 at least, does this mean that you are planning on making more development in that area that is supposedly, that has a lot of trees, and basically I think you're trying to protect?
So we're getting a lot of echo. Could I ask you to submit written testimony?
Sure.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you so much for your patience in waiting to testify, but I think we need to just take your testimony as written. So thank you. The next person on our list is Fran Warren.
And my name is Fran Warren, and I'm speaking on behalf of Tree Keepers. And Todd told me earlier today that I would have 5 minutes for my testimony.
Because you're representing a group?
Yes.
Yes, you may have 5 minutes.
So my name is Fran Warren. I currently live in the West Hills after living on Cooper Mountain for 40 years. I'm one of the co-founders of Tree Keepers of Washington County. And our goal is to show that trees and housing developments can and should coexist. There are a lot of examples already around us. I've been known as a pragmatic environmentalist, so let's see if we can pull something off here. Thank you so much, commissioners, for this opportunity to testify regarding this serious policy consideration tonight. Like many of you, we only received the draft policy just 1 week ago, and several new documents have been added just tonight. So we are still analyzing the product. We need to evaluate the additional information presented tonight. So we will likely testify yet again in the next meeting if we are able to. We must not unnecessarily impede residential development, but I and my colleagues feel the proposed policy as it is being presented today needs some more work to ensure that the county has achieved the most efficient and optimal balance. We've all been putting in hundreds of hours on this subject area. I've been working on it since at least 2010, and the ensuing policies over the years, and we feel that this is a time to finally get it right. We feel that the LUT team needs more time and resources to address the community input more rigorously. Because likely you've received many, many pages of testimony before you, I'm not submitted our written testimony for tonight, and we will submit that at a later date. We're very appreciative of the incredible efforts of the Land Use and Transportation Goal 5 project team regarding this and previous SNR and policy work. They have not just checked off the boxes to fulfill the community engagement goals, but the team has been providing special reviews for opinion leaders. A big problem we feel is that community suggestions and recommendations are not really being incorporated in the policy development. This can only lead to, I'm fearful that this can only lead to further opposition litigations once the policy is adopted. So just a few of the things that we have been talking about. We need a clear no removal clause for mature oak trees, many of which are 150 years old, heritage trees, and certain tree clusters whose roots are intertwined. This would not apply to diseased trees or trees which have been identified as nuisance trees by an ISA-certified arborist. Developers need to have this in the policy to ensure they are informed in advance of their options and non-options. The mitigation trade-offs identified in the policy nowhere near equate to the ecological impacts of removing mature trees. We need greater hydrology protections. We need to ensure these natural water resources, many of which are underground, often called headwaters, will still be around as our air temperatures increase and water supply in Washington County is drained. We need to document the scientific basis for the calculations indicated in the policy. It is our observation that this policy is no stricter on tree protection than it was prior. It is merely trying to apply specific numerical numbers. Developers and the community members all need to better understand why these particular valuations were selected. We need to see practical applications with calculated economic impacts to support the selected valuations and to help developers make better decisions. With the new pressures of the CHIPS Act, the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis legislation recommendations, plus middle housing all bring new pressures for buildable land and impacts on our natural environment. We need to be planning for a managed outcome given all these challenges. And in particular, I've voiced a strong concern that we need prioritization of significant natural resource as mapped by ODFW priority conservation corridors, wildlife corridors. For instance, there are very specific areas that have been identified by ODFW as priority wildlife corridors. We can't save everything, but we should at minimum save those specific areas. And those are not even mentioned in the policy as I saw it last time. So I thank you very much. And tree keepers and I are always available for questions. I think I've memorized all of the prior code, and I've now got some new literature for me to memorize.
Thank you for your testimony. Next is Jim Long.
Excuse me, Chair Lockwood.
Yeah.
We have Lillian Stone now online.
Okay. Let's go back then. And Ms. Stone, would you please go ahead?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful, thank you. My name is Lily Stone, and I reside on Vandermost Road in the Shoals Valley. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here this evening. I would like to thank the county for doing the work to update the significant resources mapping and the work that occurred during the Goal 5 inventory update process to ensure the continued preservation of the wonderful natural resources within our county. I have a few points that I think will help enhance the proposal and protection of our significant natural resources within the county. First, the references to land outside of the urban growth boundary, specifically references 422.21, 422.22, and 422.23, should likely be removed since this ordinance is focused on urban areas, and we shouldn't be referencing allowing development on significant natural resources outside of the urban growth boundary. Second, in Article 7, there does not appear to be mitigation measures required for transportation facilities. Public transportation facilities have significant impacts on nearby streams, wetlands, and associated riparian habitats. There should be required alternatives analysis supported by an independent traffic consultant before one of these SNRs is impacted. And there should be a requirement that the county pick a path that involves the least impact to the SNRs as possible. Third, continued development in the same area of wetlands and riparian habitats makes those remaining downstream resources have a higher value to the habitat itself. There should be some reflection of that higher value within this proposal. Fourth, it would be helpful to have a migration plan and pathway more completely contemplated here to help preserve our local wildlife as well. And lastly, it would be beneficial to have an incentive for developers to not develop in and around significant natural resources beyond just the required mitigation measures. Maybe this isn't appropriate for these ordinances, but perhaps there could be lower building permit costs for areas that don't have significant natural resources. I hope that you'll take some of these points under consideration to be implemented into these ordinances to ensure the preservation of beautiful resources within our county. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. I think I skipped Andy Hagen, or did he not? Is Andy Hagen available? No, okay.
Chair Lockwood,
yes.
We have Tanya Steele. She was the first person on the list.
Okay.
She's available.
She is available, right? Okay. Please go ahead, Ms. Steele.
But if he is online, if he could raise his hand and let us know. Seeing nothing, we can move on to Jim Long.
Okay, Mr. Long.
Hello.
Yes, but we.
Okay. The screen just changed totally. My name's Jim Long, Chair of the Significant Natural Resources Committee for the Committee for Community Involvement. We have, and I submitted to you the first letter as a draft because it hasn't yet been approved by the full CCI, which will be focused on 901 and 902 on August 20th, the night before your next hearing. So we encourage you to hold another public hearing as we perceive more issues, as others have stated, with the ordinance. Do I have time to read the entire 7 pages? I'll probably just summarize. So I'm here for the Significant Natural Resources Committee, not the CCI. We oppose the proposed ordinance 901 and 902 as currently written. Please accept our support for our subcommittee's input. The current proposals fail to strike a balance between housing production and the need to protect remaining natural resources, including trees and wildlife habitat. Protection is one of our favorite words with this. For upland habitat, consolidating upland habitat classifications obscure critical distinctions between different types of upland habitats, each of which may have unique ecological and conservation needs. There's a level of ambiguity in these proposed ordinances, and we will identify more specifically what they are. In Article 422-4.4, criteria of exemption A, the lot contains less than 500 square feet of upland wildlife habitat. This would not cover an existing massive oak tree or rare pollinator habitat, both of which are of high resource value. High value upland habitat designations would effectively protect the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife priority wildlife connectivity. We're glad to see that tree replacement would occur on site. And actually, we are also like mitigation on local mitigation. Tree canopy is well known to play a key role in climate change mitigation by preventing urban heat islands, improving air and water quality, and enhancing stormwater management. Mandatory maximums must be included to preserve these essential ecosystem services. Okay, we're concerned with the duration of these ordinances and how they will ensure plant health and soil moisture. The lack of resources has already been brought up, that the county doesn't have resources now to effectively monitor and enforce all county policies. As a result, Land Use and Transportation Department relies heavily on community members to report code violations. This enforcement model is dependent on the public's ability to recognize infractions, leaving gaps in effective oversight as well as responsiveness. To improve this process, it is critical to consider additional Washington County resources. Transparency. Detailed information on mitigation efforts have been undertaken, including specific actions, are things that we need. We need this information. We recommend Washington County provide details regarding mitigation activities assigned and or implemented within the last 5 years for the purpose of calculating ecological impacts as a result of SNR tree losses. We find the tree valuation points to be a little confusing. There are cumulative effects of the current policies and the way Washington County has been developed over the years. Oak trees are slow-growing, sturdy trees, but there are other trees besides oak trees that should be protected also. The ponderosa pine needs to be protected, but also including the Pacific willow and some others. We recommend cities' qualified inventory updates should be included as part of the SNR mapping process. The city of Beaverton re-inventoried sections of Cooper Mountain, and they should be included in the plan. Washington County Goal 5 Amendment does not include these areas yet. The areas outside the UGB should also be protected. They need protections. There's the ESEE analysis is subjective. This is notable since over 200 trees have recently been removed in public right-of-way by Washington County due to conflicts with recent infrastructure decisions. All of these street trees provide needed shade to pedestrians, bicyclers.
Mr. Long, your time is up.
Okay, there's a bunch of suggestions that our committee has come up with. You've got it all in in the document I submitted earlier today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony.
Chair Lockwood, can we try Andy Hagen again?
Sure. Mr. Hagen?
Mr. Hagen, are you online? Not seeing him online. Is there anyone in the audience or virtual audience that would like to communicate to the Planning Commission on this ordinance or ordinances? We do have someone online. It's Andrea Amico.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good evening, Chair Lockwood and members of the Planning Commission. My name is Andrea. I reside in Washington County and I'm a member of Save Shoals. Ordinance 901 and 902 are the utmost importance because they will change Washington County forever.
You're
and
very
affect
soft.
future generations.
Can you be a little louder?
Sure. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Hello?
Yes,
Okay.
please go ahead.
Future generations. According to the 2019 study, we have already lost 85% of our SNRs, and with 901 and 902, you could lose the remaining 15%. The state of Oregon has a timber regulation to protect streams and tree canopy. Oregon law requires that trees be left as buffers along streams to protect water quality and fish habitat. Forest buffers shade streams, keep water cool, trees fall streams, form aquatic habitat. Buffer widths vary depending on the stream size and whether the streams contain fish or provide drinking water. 901 states that creeks and drainages shall be addressed through applications provisions of the CDC. And the CDC states the development within riparian areas, water areas, wetlands, fish and wildlife habitat shall comply with the applicable state and federal regulatory guidelines. But 901 says roads require bridges shall preferred means of crossing streams and waterways rather than infills, piping, or channelization of water flow. 901 also states that retention of trees shall be encouraged, particularly when existing stands of trees can be used to lessen the impact of a new attached unit development. Therefore, 901 would allow cutting trees, infills, and culverts because it is written as preferred or as encouraged. 901 doesn't preserve or protect our streams or our trees. Building and crossing the SNRs should be avoided altogether. Washington County has 463,000 acres and 4,200 acres of SNRs, less than 1%. Seeking alternative plans are not even mentioned in 901 or 902. The draft Goal 5 report and the ESEE, those need to be addressed also, but I don't have time to talk about those. But thank you very much for your committed dedication and work that you guys do for Washington County.
Thank you for testifying. Is there anyone else?
Seeing no one. Oh, we do have one. Val Betancourt.
All right, is it?
Val Betancourt.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, please go ahead.
I have lots of things that I'm going to be reviewing as well after this because there has been a lot of new information, but I do have lots of questions. Is that if there is a required permit to take trees down, why don't you have them apply for a permit for old growth trees like other counties? I'd also like to know what environmental surveys were done, and did any third-party environmental experts or companies evaluate your project or maps and the new laws? I also noticed that there are many mislabeled places on the map that don't include certain wetland and riparian areas, specifically the 100-year-old wetland on the Portland Golf Club property. And I'm wondering why any field work hasn't been done. And I am confused about allowing the single dwelling development on certain areas of the map. I noticed that in one of the slides, so that was a bit confusing. So I'm hoping that can be expanded on. And of course, with the permits for the old trees, of course, that would exclude hazardous, dead, and dying trees. But I also feel that it is the property owner's responsibility to have arborists make sure that the health of those trees are taken care of. And I believe that's it, but I do believe that we are in a current climate crisis, and I've seen large redwoods, Douglas fir, oak trees that are 100, 150 years old come down in my neighborhood, just be taken down by the owners and completely clear cut their entire properties just because they want to, and there's nothing to stop it since we are in unincorporated Washington County, and I can't express how much grief that brings me, especially last year whenever my neighbor cut down 3 Douglas fir trees, and one of the trees was had Cooper's hawks nesting there, and I had such great joy seeing the Cooper's hawks babies every year. And since they clear cut those trees, those Cooper's hawks are no longer staying there. So I'm just deeply concerned about our environment, and choosing the environment over greed is more important. Thank you.
Thanks for testifying. I'm wondering, she had several questions. What would be the best way for her to get her questions answered?
She could reach out directly to staff.
Yeah, just reach out to staff. Okay, thank you.
And on that note, we have heard from a number of people about their particular properties, so if they could also reach out to staff, we'd be happy to talk further with them about their particular sites.
Okay.
So Madam Chair, would you like me to answer?
Yes, please, yeah.
So the full ordinances have been online since they were filed, so we can look and make sure that the links are still there, but those were uploaded 35 days before the hearing. And what was new was a week before the hearing is when we always will do our staff report. And so the staff report was made available actually a week and a day ago, and we did send notice to all the folks that are on our natural resource list. So if you haven't signed up, please do sign up to get on the email list, and that's how we give notice of materials being ready. And so the staff report was made available a week and a day ago, and that did have those 2 other reports as attachments to them. Since those aren't part of the ordinance, they're background materials, they were attached as part of the staff report. And there were no new materials tonight except for the PowerPoint. So, and the PowerPoint will be made available on the webpage as well after tonight, so there'll be a recording of this meeting as well as the PowerPoint, so people can review that as well.
Thank you. We are done with our list of people testifying. I'm just going to close the hearing, and then Commissioner Will.
Clarify, the public hearing is closed now, but we can reopen it if we want to.
Well, now we can have some discussion if we want among ourselves.
Yeah. If I may go first.
Please do, Commissioner Will.
Thank you. I would hope that at the end of our discussion, we'll propose to, I won't make a motion now, but I just, for discussion purposes amongst ourselves, I hope that we can continue the hearing as suggested by staff, due to the fact that some of the people in the audience felt they needed more time to look at stuff. Some people also expressed difficulty in hearing sometimes, whether it was the staff or whether it was us or whether it was the people asking questions and giving testimony online. So it'd be a good opportunity for those people who need more time to take it and use it. So I really appreciate all the good questions from our commissioners and the report from the staff and the testimony from the audience. And so those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Any other comments from commissioners at this time? Well, it's just the commissioners at this point. I'm sorry. Well, it's an incredibly full amount of, do we have, Commissioner Kaiser.
Thank you, Chair Lockwood. I would just echo Commissioner Will's thoughts on that, and would suggest that it would probably be good to continue it for no other reason, for county to be able to come back and talk about it a little bit, and because some things have changed kind of recently. This has been, I know it doesn't feel like a fast process for most of us because we've been dealing with it for a long time, but I certainly think, to my mind anyway, it would be worth continuing the public hearing and leaving it open for our next meeting.
Well, we can entertain a motion at this time, and then if there's further discussion, we could discuss it after the motion has been seconded.
I'd move continuation of the public hearing to the next scheduled. Well, I'll move it to the next appropriate meeting for it to be scheduled, because I know we have a lot of stuff going on, and I don't want to say the next meeting. So I would just like to have it continued.
I'm asking staff for the date.
Thank you. We are requesting that that be August 21st, and that will allow us to research things that have come up here. We'll prepare another staff report. That'll give members of the public time to contact us and or to further research. It'll give everyone more time to read all the materials and to read the testimony that has been given. So August 21st would be the date.
Thank you. So
We
have a motion to move consideration of ordinances 901 and 902 to the August 21st Planning Commission meeting. So we have a second. Is there any discussion? Any further discussion? Commissioner Will.
I would just like to ask my commissioners if there's any specific questions that you'd like staff to answer for that hearing.
Commissioners can also submit their questions after this meeting.
Thank you.
I think we're ready for a vote on our motion.
Commissioner Fry?
Yes.
Commissioner Kaiser?
Yes.
Commissioner Monteblanco?
Yes.
Commissioner Rosenberry?
Yes.
Commissioner Will?
Yes.
Chair Lockwood?
Yes.
That's 6 votes for yes. The motion does pass.
Thank you. So we're continued till August 21st. The next item on our agenda is consideration of minutes for June 26th, 2024. Are there any corrections or additions to those minutes by any commissioner? I'm not seeing any. I wait another moment here. Commissioner Rosenberry? Oh, okay. Without objection, those minutes are accepted as submitted. Are there any Planning Commission announcements at this time? Seeing none. Next item is adjournment. Without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you.